Well, basically, she said these were serious offenses that Roger Stone essentially had been trying to cover up for the president. She clearly thought that these were offenses that deserved prison time. More than 3 years in prison, George, is a very significant sentence for a first-time offender on a white-collar crime like this, George.
It was, and she also took note of the fact that President Trump had tweeted on the case, had spoken out on the case. She said that was serious, but it would not affect her decision.
Absolutely, George. She was very measured today throughout. And she was also quite upset with the way that Roger Stone had conducted himself throughout these proceedings, that she had given him admonishments a number of times, and it took considerable time for him to comply with the court's order. George, you'll recall that he was under a gag order. At one point, he had posted something with the judge near our crosshairs. So she today imposed the sentence and made it clear that his act of obstructing Congress in terms of their investigation, lying to Congress, and witness tampering was not something that the court could tolerate, George.
That's right, Pierre. And Pierre, the prosecutors in court today, of course, these were new prosecutors brought in after the original prosecutors resigned after being overturned by the Attorney General. And they also appeared not to be influenced by the president's tweets on this case. They said the prosecution was righteous, and they stood by the calls for the sentence for Roger Stone.
George, it was fascinating that one of the prosecutors today apologized for the confusion in front of the court. It was interesting to know that the judge said when she looked at those original recommendations of 7 to 9 years, she thought that was too much, and she would not consider putting him in jail, in prison for that amount of time. But the prosecution today, over and over, did make the case that Roger Stone did deserve prison time today, George. And I thought that was very interesting that they kept emphasizing that there were some upward departures in terms of what he could be sentenced to, and that they thought that he should get, quote, substantial prison time.
Okay, Pierre, thanks very much. I'm going to bring in our senior White House correspondent, Cecilia Vega, for more on this. A quote from Judge Jackson, Cecilia: "He was not prosecuted, as some have claimed, for standing up for the president. He was prosecuted for covering up for the president." Of course, the president himself is one of the people who said that Roger Stone is being prosecuted for standing up for the president, and he was tweeting right during the sentencing proceedings.
Remarkable. He has not stopped tweeting through all of this, despite the Attorney General saying that these tweets make his job impossible to do. George, do you know this case has become a lightning rod here in Washington, unexpectedly so, and frankly, really quickly. Take a look at the tweet that the president just tweeted out this morning, basically implying that there is a pardon to come for Roger Stone. It's not a question of if, but when. He said, what has happened to Roger Stone should never happen to anyone in our country again. And he then goes on to tweet a video where Tucker Carlson of Fox News talks about Roger Stone should be set free. Donald Trump has expressed overwhelming sympathy for Roger Stone. He has said that he has been treated unfairly throughout this process. They are good friends. Roger Stone is and was a longtime confidant of President Trump. This is a relationship that goes back to the 1970s into the 80s. But really, Roger Stone became a symbol for Donald Trump, and not just because he was a friend, but because he became someone who Donald Trump painted as persecuted as part of this witch hunt, this Mueller probe, and he did not want to let that go. And so really Stone became a symbol of everything that Donald Trump saw wrong in the Mueller investigation.
And of course, Judge Jackson also said that one of Stone's motives was to shield President Trump. The big question right now, we've seen a spree of pardons for President Trump this week. Will he pardon Roger Stone?
Yeah, I mean, it really seems like this is being the worst kept secret in Washington, George. It seems like there is a pardon to come. It could be hours, it could be days. I think we're all sort of waiting to see, but I don't think this is going to be a big surprise to anyone when, in fact, if Donald Trump pardons Roger Stone.
Let me bring in Dan Abrams for more on this. Boy, Dan Abrams, Judge Jackson, appointed to the bench, I believe, by President Obama, was in a really tough spot right here, facing attacks from the president in public. She took note of those as well, but she also took note of arguments on the other side and rejected that original recommendation of a 7 to 9 year sentence as too extensive.
This is exactly the sort of sentence that one would have expected if you followed the case closely. Remember, in a typical case, prosecutors will often come in at a higher recommendation than a judge ends up sentencing the person to. So it's not that surprising that the initial prosecutors came in at 7 to 9 years. Definitely, on the high end, they were looking at certain enhancements, et cetera. You can read their 26-page brief on this. Then the Justice Department submits its revised memo, which just sort of vaguely asks for prison time. But remember, if the president does pardon Roger Stone now, that is showing real contempt for the Department of Justice. I mean, the Department of Justice, again, through William Barr and the new prosecutors who are there, have again said this was a righteous prosecution, that Stone deserves prison time. For the president to step in at this point is to really, again, I think, put him at odds with his Department of Justice.
Let me press you on that right there, because as I see you mentioned, remember in that interview with Pierre Thomas last week, the Attorney General Barr said that the president's tweets were making his job impossible. It didn't stop the president from tweeting on Justice Department business after the fact, yet William Barr has stayed in the job.
Stayed in the job so far. And the president has continued to tweet, has continued to do exactly the sorts of things that Barr has said were problematic. Look, I don't think it's fake that Barr is upset and angry at the president tweeting. He's got to go back and explain to this entire department, thousands of people, why they're doing what they're doing when the president of the United States is undermining them. So in a case like this, the president's words do matter, but more important are going to be his actions. And if we see that this has all been a setup, meaning everything he's been saying and doing and the other pardons that we saw earlier this week, as a setup to pardon Roger Stone, again, I think that has to be viewed as a rebuke of his own Justice Department, basically saying, you guys never should have prosecuted this guy, and I'm going to fix it.
Dan Abrams, thanks. Want to go to Kira Phillips at the White House. Kira, you're on the scene at the White House today. What are aides there saying about a possible pardon?
Exactly what Cecilia just said about it's like the worst kept secret in Washington that President Trump is not going to let Roger Stone go to prison. Plain and simple, that pardon is going to come. Senior White House officials, a number of them telling me within just the 15 minutes, George, that pardon will come. And if you look, as Dan mentioned, at the recent pardons, Rod Blagojevich and also Michael Milken, I mean, it's softening the battlefield. So indeed, this relationship goes back more than 3 decades, and we will see if the president shows mercy on his longtime confidant.
Okay, Roger Stone has been sentenced to 40 months in prison by Judge Amy Berman Jackson in federal court. Also fined $20,000 on charges of lying to Congress, tampering with a witness. We're going to return now to our regular programming. Coverage will continue on ABC News Live, and of course, a full report tonight on World News Tonight with David Muir. Have a good afternoon.